My name is Kevin Mizner. I live in Pittston, Maine. I'm a Maine native, except in my state, if you weren't born in Maine, you'll never be a native. I moved to Maine my family moved up from Philadelphia when I was about 4.5, 5 years old. And so in our culture, I'm still from away. But I consider myself a Mainer. As far as my art is concerned, I like everyone else who's ever slung a paintbrush. I probably picked up a pencil first and started drawing with that when I was still 5, 6 years old, and it just never occurred to me to stop. I've been doing it all of my life. I got into oil paints when I was probably around 15 years old, which was just about 2 or 3 years ago. I'm kidding. It was a long, long time ago. One of the reasons I got into oil paints is because all of the art masters that I had seen in books were oil painters. When I was a really young kid, I tried messing around with watercolors and I found out that that's really difficult. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and the beautiful thing about oil paintings and using oils is that if you make a mistake, you can fix it. You can paint right over it. Watercolors didn't allow me to have that. So the perfectionist in me, if I made a mistake with a watercolor, I would just get upset and frustrated. So I just went with oil paints. With oil paints, the luminosity, the textures, to me, they're very really appealing. One of the first experiences that I ever had with looking at a true master's painting. I was a young man. I was in the Air Force back in the early 1980s, and I was stationed in Germany. As Europe is a small area, you could go just a few hours and go into different countries. I went into France. I went to the Louvre, and my first experience with actually seeing masterpieces in person as opposed to in magazines or in books, because the internet didn't exist back when I was a kid. Looking at those paintings and seeing the finish and seeing how the artist did that, and it set off in my mind, how did they do that? From that day on, I've been trying to figure it out. How did they do that? And that's basically what my technique is today. It's very old-fashioned. I think anybody who ever painted in the Renaissance could probably come into my studio and pick up where they left off, because it's nothing new.
You were in the Air Force?
I was, yes.
Have you done any paintings related to that experience?
The time that I was in the Air Force, I did some work, but they were of portraits of commanders, things like that. To be honest with you, I couldn't identify a plane from a biplane. I honestly, why I was in the Air Force is beyond me. I worked in the medical field in the Air Force. That was what they considered my specialty. But I did some artwork for them because they knew that I could draw and paint. But I never really did anything as militarily like that.
Then you came to Maine and you started a series.
Oh, the Continuum series. With the Continuum series, it's something that's near and dear to my heart. When I really first started painting, I was trying to find my footing. What is it that I'm going to be known for? What kind of style am I going to have? When I decided to become a full-time painter, I tried not not a lot of styles, but different subjects. In Maine, we're known for our coastal beauty, the rock-bound coast of Maine. It's been the home for artists for hundreds of years. Andrew Wyeth, Winslow Homer, Edward Hopper, some of the greatest of painters have painted in Maine. So painting landscapes, painting seascapes was something that I felt as a Mainer and as a painter that I needed to do. But to be honest, it felt a little bit like I was reaching, that it wasn't really me, it was an expectation of what I should be doing. I figured out that, what I'd really rather be doing is more figurative work, trying to incorporate people in scenes. And hearkening back to what I love about the state, its natural beauty, but also, the history that the state has. When I started doing this series called Americana, my concept was that I was going to interpret in paint everyday scenes of life as it would have been in Maine, just typical things, not necessarily historical, but maybe, how did you cut the grass? How did you mow the hay back in 1880? So I did paintings along those lines. While it was fun to do, and I enjoyed history, and it really gave me a chance to study the history of it and look at old photographs and things like that and try to incorporate it and make it my own. There was still in my mind something that was a little bit missing, in that I had to imagine what they were doing, what they were seeing. A little while ago, probably about 3 years ago, I was looking through a photo album from about 1910. And because me and my wife, we hang out at antique stores and flea markets, and I'm always buying old things. And I was looking at these photographs, and there were just a family in their book, and they were playful. They were just everyday folks having fun, circa 1910. But I noticed that in the vast majority of them, while some of them were posed and some of them were casual, there was almost always someone looking at the camera, smiling and laughing. And that person was almost always a female. And so I was looking at these paintings and I said to myself, gee whiz, I need to do something with these. Can I turn them into paintings? Thinking to myself, well, am I going to just colorize these black and white photos and bringing them to life that way? And then I got the idea of, when people think of history, if they think of it at all, they think of it as some black and white time in the past, some time that doesn't bear any relation to what we're going through today, populated by people who wore funky clothes, who, they had their strange clothes, and they drove cars that none of us recognize, and they rode horses. It's like a completely different world. So what I wanted to do is show that the people back then, our ancestors, were as real and flesh and blood as we are today. To do that, I came up with the concept of interpreting a photograph in black and white as it appears in the photograph, but the person that, to me, connects with the viewer, who connects with how we are today, that person would go in color. The pretty dresses they wore, they actually were very colorful people. They were not gray and black and white. They were very colorful clothes. And having just that person be the link between us now and them back then. So it pays homage to those who still think of the past as some black and white time, but it reminds you that, what? There were real people back then, and they smiled and they laughed and they had their lives. And when that camera clicked and they moved on to whatever world they went into, it eventually led up to ours today. And that's why I call it the Continuum series.
You also went into the rural areas and captured the rural life.
Those are when I do landscapes, and what I love to have is, again, that same concept of history with some modern thrown in. So when I'm painting barns, when I'm painting, the things that are very common around here where I live, we also have a community of folks that they're called the Amish. And the Amish are folks in the United States, and then they're actually worldwide, but here in Maine, is that they've eschewed modernism. So they don't have phones, they don't have electricity, they will ride around in horse and buggies, they wear very drab uniform clothing, actually very much, they live in existence as if it was 1890. They certainly know of all the things that we have, but they wanted to live their life in a simple way. And with my love of history, and seeing all of these things in books, say for instance of haying, um, back in the 1880s. And then when the Amish moved into my community, because I live out here in rural countryside, and seeing them do those very same things, you know, haying with pairs of teams of horses, with riding by in their horses and buggies, with their barns that they've kept just pretty much the same way and giving it the same use as a barn should have to store animals and to keep hay. It seeing that black and white world in full color. And that also helped with the continuum. It spurred me into thinking of how people did these things back then were just pretty much like us now.
You worked on lobster boats.
I lived in the coast of Maine in a town called Cundy's Harbor. Cundy's Harbor is a fishing village. It's home to probably 40 lobstermen who go out in their boats and they catch Maine's most famous aquifer. No, that's the wrong thing to say. Most famous food, which is the lobster. And having lived in Cundy's Harbor, worked right next to one of the guys who went out and did that, I asked him if I could join up and work with him. And one of the reasons I did that, actually the sole reason I did that, is because at the time I was thinking that I could paint scenes of Maine people through their eyes. And to do that, I needed to see through their eyes as well. So I asked to join up on the boat simply because I wanted, and I brought my camera with me every single day. The hardest job I ever have done in my life, but I took thousands of photographs of us lobstering and also of the ocean, of the sky, so that, again, I can incorporate those into my paintings because I'm a bit of a stickler for realism. And when I paint something, I want to know exactly what I'm painting and what it's for and how it's used. So that was the reason I joined up on that boat and worked for a year as a lobsterman. And I've certainly gained a great appreciation for how hard they work.
Beautiful lights that you have in your paintings. How do you capture that?
One of the ways that I do that, I try to get color and light in my paintings, is through a method called glazing. And again, you know, that harkens back to the Renaissance, where you would have a full grisaille, black and white, and then you would just glaze transparent colors on top. So when light shines through those layers and bounces back into your eyes, it combines those layers and gives the paintings a luminosity that, in my mind, only works through that glazing technique. You can pile on a pile of paint that's an inch thick, and light is going to hit the top microns. Such to say, I've got a pile of yellow, and light will hit off that yellow and bounce into your eyes, but it's only going to hit the top of it. No matter how thick you've made that paint, it's only going to hit the top film. But when you have glazing and you have like transparent layers of saran wrap, the light shines all the way through, and when it comes back at you, it picks up all of those layers and makes the painting that much more vibrant.
You mentioned that you use photos, sketches. You also go out and do plein air.
I do plein air, and I've brought along some props, as it were. This is, if we can see this so it doesn't glare too much. This particular picture, there we go, it's straight now. This particular picture is of a place here on my property. There's a little stream that runs around the edge of my property, so I decided I was going to do a plein air. And that's what this is. And if you notice the glare, it was done in a transparent manner. Really done the same way that I would do a studio painting, except I really did do this outside. And if you don't mind, I'm going to show some ideas, some of the techniques that I've used. That photograph right there is where I had set my easel up to paint that scene. I really did do that one plein air. But I want to show a series of steps, if you don't mind, with some of the other things that, another painting that I did that I documented in photos. And my beautiful wife Ellen's going to have to help me here because I need to find, oh, here we go. Now, when I do a plein air painting, I like to think of a plein air painting as just an extension of my studio paintings, the same way, or at least the same look as I would give it if it was in the studio. I think plein air painters have fallen into a bit of a trap in that there's an expectation of how their paintings are supposed to look. They think more along the lines of, well, it has to look loose, it has to look brushy, it has to look like I've just slapped the paint on, just like Monet would do. When I do a plein air, I try to make it look like, not like Monet did it, but how I would do it. I want my paintings to have a similar feel, so it looked like the same guy painted the pictures. Now, this was the inspiration for a painting that I did. And in this particular one, this is actually my home, it's where I live. The larger building is my garage, and you can look up the hill and you can see a porch. And that was my inspiration. It was a beautiful summer day. Now, with this particular image, and can you see this drawing? Okay, this is a drawing that I made of the scene. I set my easel up and I drew that from life onto a, that was a 16-inch tall, 12-inch wide masonite panel that I gessoed. Because the difference between how a camera sees and how our eyes see are completely different. And I don't particularly care to copy photographs because of those distortions. So if I'm going to do a plein air, I'm not going to just take a photograph of it and paint it. I'm going to draw it to the best of my ability as I see it. So this is actually underneath the paint. This is, for all intents and purposes, my grisaille, because I drew this as finely as I possibly could, put in the shading so that I could have the values correct, and then I would paint on top of this. So the next step on this one, oh yes, this is my wife Ellen.
Hi.
Okay. Technology is a wonderful thing. This was just a wash of paint that I put on top of the drawing. This image is just a wash, probably a burnt sienna if I recall, of just on top of the drawing that I did. Again, I did the drawing outside, viewing the scene. And from there, it was just a matter of waiting for the nice days. And unfortunately, we had some great days, so I could go out and paint this. Can you see this particular one?
Yes.
This one is the final painting. This is called North Side. All of the ingredients of this piece was done, from life, but in the manner that I would do it in the studio. So I didn't start the painting outside as far as using color. When I was outside working with color, I was just looking at how the color was on the various elements. How the colors were on the siding of the building on the left. How the colors worked in the shadows cast from a tree, on the ground, and in the windows. Plein air painting is so difficult because we all understand that light changes. The world keeps turning, and we find ourselves chasing shadows and chasing light. Having everything be formed and pretty well locked in gave me the opportunity to not worry about where the light was going, where the shadows were going, but using the colors that were in those shadows and using the colors that were in the light so that I could have a more effective painting in it, and I didn't really have to worry about it so much. Because to me, painting is application of color. I try not to draw as I paint. I'm trying to put the proper colors down in the areas that I've already drawn. So I'm not even thinking about, is this window crooked? I'm just thinking about, what are the colors in this window? And that's one of the ways that I do plein air. I have done it the other way, which is set your easel up outside and look at it and paint it. And those are good for color notes, for studies. But when I want to work on a painting that's a little bit more refined, that's the manner in which I do it. That's the way I did this. I know it's going to be small, but that's the way I did this. I drew that out on a panel, and when I went outside, it took me about 4 or 5 consecutive days. I did glaze colors, and on some aspects, for highlights, I may have used some opaque color, some whiter highlights, but looking at the scene in front of me to gauge the proper colors and working with what was already done underneath.
Are you using brushes and palette knives as well?
I use brushes, I'll use palette knives, I will use Q-tips to paint, to wipe things off. I will use edges of rulers to scrape paint. Anything that I can use that will give me the effect that I'm shooting for is fair game. The bristles, the paint brushes that I generally use are hog's hair bristles. I use flats, long flats, and I have sables for some of the finer details. I stay away from the synthetics, although I used them for years and years. I have found that natural fibers work so much better. You know, they're not incredibly more expensive, and what you get from the finished product is so much better than what you get from synthetic materials. So I'll go for the natural stuff every time.
You seem to prefer medium-size canvases.
The size of the canvas is really dictated on the subject and what I want to do with it. Here in the studio, you know, we all have only so much space. And if you're trying to make paintings to sell for the public, not everybody has a huge wall that they can put a painting on. As a matter of fact, most homes nowadays have blessed little wall space to hang anything up. So I try to keep my paintings along the medium size. I may go for, say, a 20 by 24 inches, maybe 25 by 30. That's pretty much as big as most people want to buy. The continuum paintings are a bit of an exception because I've painted those rather big. If I can stand up and show you a preliminary drawing that I did for one of them. Now, this particular one, this sheet is 24 inches wide. It's 36 inches tall. And this is one of 4 characters I put in a painting. So they were all pretty big. And the canvas itself is 3 feet tall by 4 feet long. And this is drawn exactly the size that I painted it. And I did 4 of these so that each subject had its own work. And this is one of the ways that it's really a carryover from my plein air work, how I would draw everything out. When I'm doing a studio painting, I do the same thing. I will draw it all out, then transfer that to the canvas, and then work on the painting. Because again, I want to, when I'm doing the painting, I want to apply color and not worry about the drawing. I want that done.
Could we spend a few minutes on your portraits, including your self-portraits?
I did that portrait this past year. I call it at 60 because that's how old I am now. And I just felt it would be kind of fun to document, you know, the artist, the self-portrait at that age. Um, I'm not one for self-portraits, nor am I one for selfies. I generally tend to run and hide when cameras are around. I'd much rather take the photo than be in it. But in this particular one, I simply wanted to do a portrait, and I thought, well, I'm here. I guess I'll do me. This particular one, I did this in more of a reverse wipeout style, so that again, I drew it. I don't have the drawing with me, but I drew it out, transferred it to the canvas, and then I did my usual work. But as I was putting paint on, what I was doing was taking a Q-tip again, and for the highlights along the sleeves, I simply took the Q-tip into the wet paint and took it all off. Same thing for the chair. My original concept was to make it much more realistic. I almost always wear a sweatshirt when I paint, so I was going to put paint all over my sweatshirt. The chair that I have here in my studio, it's blue and it has some old-fashioned design work on it, and I was going to put that on there. And as I was working on the chair, I realized I didn't like it, so I wiped it off, and it left me with what's there on the canvas. And we call those happy accidents, because when I noticed it, I said to myself, I like that a lot better. So it changed my whole concept of how I was going to approach the piece. Everything that you see is pretty well just wiped off, except for my face, which is painted out, you know, fully full color values, all of that stuff. But the farther away you get from the face, the hands kind of just lightly painted in, and my left hand, which dangles off onto the corner there, has the background showing through with just a little bit of highlight on the hand. So I just kind of recede into the background. Doing a portrait or a self-portrait like that, where I know that it's not marketable, I'm not going to put this out into the galleries to try to sell. You can be more free, and those are the things that I'll experiment on to try different techniques to see if it works. So that's how I did that painting.
How did you decide on the background color?
I was going to do the background color again in a darker tone. I had done a imprimatura on the canvas, which is simply just a wash. It's, if I recall, Mars Violet and Terra Rosa that I just put on. It gave me a nice warm tone that I just wiped everything off, and that's how we stuck with that color. Again, it was try it, see if it works, and if it didn't work, I would have tried something else. I decided I was just going to leave it that way. This is my granddaughter, Abigail. Abby was 2 when I asked her to quickly sit down in the sun, and in this particular one, she did not hold the pose longer than 1.2 seconds. So this was painted from a photograph. This is in my living room. And I saw the sunlight coming through, and I said to myself, I need to do a painting of this child in the light. So that's where this came from. In this particular manner, all the background is just very loosely painted. It's umbers, it's the Mars Violet, it's warm tones. The highlights on the couch, on the chair, on the table, these were all done, once again, with the good old-fashioned Q-tip. They're the cheapest method of painting I have yet to find. And in some cases, for the fine little dots and lights, I would take the edge of a palette knife and scrape that off. Some of the bluish tones are just simply that, just light colors of paint, because I wanted to have the full effect of painting on Abby herself. And it's really the play of light and just this little urchin sitting there. That's where all the work went into. A lot of what you see, like with her shirt, it's in the shadowed side, it's basically just the underpainting that I put some stripes on. I painted the color in the light side. Same thing with her socks. It's just where the light's going to shine, but as you get closer up to her head, that was the full color. That's the more formal treatment, and everything else is just kind of recedes from that. It's the concept of, when we're painting, do you make the focal point the only thing that's really clear in the painting and fuzz everything out because that's the way our eyes see? Whatever we stare at, we see in focus, and everything in our peripheral vision is faded out. There are some artists, and I'm kind of one of them as well, who would much rather prefer to have everything not be in the same degree of focus, or at least as far as importance in a painting, but design the painting so that your eyes go to the focal point. That's where you will look, and your eyes will work as eyes do, which is you're looking at the focal point of my painting. That's in sharp detail, while the periphery in the painting is not in sharp detail. But you can look over at the corner at something else and then see the detail then, because that's the way your eyes would work. If you walked into a room, you look over and you see something, it's in detail. Everything else is fuzzed. But you turn your vision, the next thing you look at is in detail. That's the way I kind of like to have my paintings, how I set them up. I'm not the only one, and I didn't think of doing that on my own. I think Andrew Wyeth does that as well. Everything that he does is really highly detailed. We know that that's his style. But even in that case, he makes you look at what he wants you to look at through his composition. And that's what I try to emulate in my paintings as well.
Contrasts are very important for you, and lighting is crucial in nuancing these contrasts.
A lot of times when folks paint, and I know I did this when I was, really learning the concept of how do you paint light, how do you paint shadow, we would tend to paint in a very high contrast, right? We would make things, if it was in sunlight, we'd add a lot of white. And if it was in shadow, we'd add a lot of black. But in reality, it doesn't really work that way, because if we're outside looking at things, we can see into those shadows. We can see colors in there. We can see colors where things are in the light. So I work in a degree of contrast, but what I try to do most is keep the colors so that they're naturalistic. To do that, I'll change the values, and that's where you get most of the contrast. For the values, I don't want to burn out or highlight too much, because you lose the color. So I'll lower the highlight just a bit, which means I'm going to have to darken the shadow just a bit to make sure that the painting has full color everywhere, but it still gives you the appearance or the feel that you're standing in sunlight, or you're standing in shadow looking out at sunlight.
When did the portraits come? Later, after you started painting?
Believe it or not, I was doing portraits of people, goodness, even when I was like a youngster and a teen, I've always enjoyed drawing people. Before I even started to paint, I was working on that. I can't say they were good, but I did them. I think the first painting I ever did was a painting of Abraham Lincoln. And trust me, it wasn't a very good painting of Abraham Lincoln, but it was a portrait. I taught myself how to paint, and that's probably why I started with portraits, because nobody told me that those are really hard. So I just started working in oil paint, oil color, what I had naturally done in pencil. I actually did I had a pretty good little gig doing portraits of brides and grooms for their upcoming nuptials. I did that for a number of years. But then I started to go into the landscape, seascape mode a little bit more. And it's really only been in the last probably 7 or 8 years that I've gotten really back into the portraits and getting back into, you know, my love of face, of figuratives, of anatomy, and trying to again show through the continuum or the Americana, showing people, because again that's the most interesting aspect to me.
How does your relationship with the galleries, how is it going right now?
Galleries have had a very difficult time, you know, through the pandemic. Here in Maine, you know, like everywhere else in the United States, retail establishments are not doing as well as they used to. People want to buy online, they want to order from Amazon or mail order places, and the galleries have noticed that, so they're upping their presence on their website, trying to reach out more through social media, through constant contact as far as emails and things like that. The galleries that I've been very fortunate enough to work with deal with very good artists. We do this every single day. We're trying to produce the best work we possibly can, and the galleries are doing their best work to contact the collectors to push their products out. So working with a gallery, it's symbiotic. You have to work with each other. You know, you can't just expect that, you know, they're going to do everything for you, and all you have to do is just paint your pictures and kick back and don't even worry about it. I think you need to contact your galleries to just to chat, you know, just to see how things are going. Let them know you're still there. You know, I'm not the most prolific painter. I don't show everything that I paint because I have, it's either called high standards or insecurities, one or the other. I'm not sure. But if I will paint a picture, sometimes I'll say, oh, okay, I'm going to paint this picture for that gallery and that clientele, and this next picture is going to be for the other galleries and their clientele. Working with the galleries, painting what, not necessarily what they want you to paint, but painting that still means something to me, but would help them and their collectors as well. That's something that I think all artists should really work at. You know, we're creative, we're painters, but we're business people. You know, we're creating a product. We create, and for want of a better phrase, we're creating wall hangings. And there's a lot of people out there that can create wall hangings. Do you want to make it a designer wall hanging, decorative, or do you want to make it a substantial piece of art? Whatever you want to do. But once you've done that, working with those who are going to try to sell it for you is paramount.
Do you also show at art fairs or art salons?
When I was first dipping my toes in the water of selling my work, I would put my paintings anywhere that anybody had a wall, whether it would be a town hall, a doctor's office, dentist office, library, restaurants, the art in the parks that we have here in the States. You know, I did all of those. I have eventually have kind of like worked my way out of those, not because I feel that I'm superior, but it's just a lot of time. And I never really had, to be perfectly honest, great success in doing that. You know, when people go to a restaurant, maybe they'll buy a painting, but they probably want to try the spaghetti first. And they're not there to buy a painting. Same thing as a doctor's office. You know, putting paintings in galleries, people walk into a gallery with the expectation maybe they might buy something, but they don't necessarily do that when they're going into the dentist office. Art in the park, you know, people will come through and it is a good way of meeting other artists, engaging in the community, seeing people and talking to them face to face. I did have a studio out in public a few years ago where it was a gallery slash studio, so people could come in, and I loved chatting with the folks that came in and talking. But all in all, I would much rather spend my time trying to create the best possible painting I can make here in the studio, and not have to worry about taking my paintings out on the road to various functions and places.
How can people find you?
I am visible on the World Wide Web at www.kmeisner.com. I'm on Instagram as Kevin Mizner. I'm on Facebook, although I don't really use Facebook as a selling thing. It just tells you a little bit more about me. And there's no politics involved in my Facebook. But it's free to the public. Anybody can click on if they wish to and follow me. You can follow me on Facebook, and that's basically how I can be seen. All the contact information is on my website, as far as my email address and my telephone, and how you can get in touch with me if you'd like to.
What would you say right now the biggest challenge for an artist is?
Probably the biggest challenge that an artist has right now is, and it's an age-old one to be perfectly honest, it's rising above and being seen. When the internet first made its appearance 20 years ago, and the idea was that, well, if you had a website, then people could go from wherever in the world and look at your website, kind of like it's your own star up in the sky. But now there's billions of stars up in the sky. So how are you going to get somebody to look at your star? Instagram, Facebook, people jumped on that in an effort. Notice my star. Being noticed is probably the biggest thing. And again, it always has been. I have found, and I firmly believe, that the only way you're really going to be noticed is do your best work. Put your best work out there wherever you can. Contact galleries with your best work, and keep trying to improve. Just guess. Don't worry about what you can't control. When a painting goes off to a gallery, when I put a painting on my website, I'll promote it to the best I can, but I can't control who's going to find my website at any given time. I can't control if they're going to click on that picture and ultimately purchase it. So I'm not going to worry about that. The only thing I can control is making the best painting I can possibly make. And that's what I try to do every single day.